Just recently we replaced the alternator on our Bobcat 463, and I wanted to go over how I diagnosed the faulty alternator, because I see too many times where people replace the battery and they replace the alternator and they're replacing everything under the sun when a proper diagnostic has not been done. If you go to a garage and they sell you an alternator and a battery, I don't think they've really done a proper diagnostic of what the problem is. You'll notice in this battery here, unlike most Bobcats, the positive terminal, which is right there, is on the outside. Now normally on a Bobcat it's reversed. The positive is on the inside and the negative is here on the outside, which is accessible. Now the reason that I changed that was because if I ever have to boost it, or if I have to boost another vehicle with the Bobcat, I want that positive terminal here where I can get at it. If it's in there, if it's tucked into the back, you run the risk of shorting it out against the ground, against the motor or against the body. This way it's nice and easy to get at, and then you can use a ground anywhere on the engine. So if I put my booster cables, my positive here, I can put my negative over here on one of the bolts at the starter or somewhere else on the engine. Then I have continuity. So that's why we changed that around to go there. So now when we had a no start condition here on our Bobcat, the first thing we want to check is how good is that battery? Is it holding a charge? Is it shorting out, or one of the cells shorting out? Now, skid steers are notoriously bad on batteries simply because they bounce around a lot. The nice thing about this is that if I take this battery out, I can run over to Canadian Tire and they'll check that battery for me at no charge. If it turns out the battery is bad, I can just give them the battery right there on the spot, and they'll sell me a new one. So that's what the nice thing about the battery, and that's where you want to start when you're doing your diagnostic. Are the battery terminals clean? Is the battery still good? So the first thing you do is return it, have it checked out. If you don't have a load tester, take it down to Canadian Tire. Those guys are really friendly. They'll test it for you. If it turns out it's the battery, well, problem solved, throw another battery in and away you go. Now, from there, we did check the battery out. We put it on our load tester. It tested out fine, so there's no reason to worry about that battery. Our next step is to look at our utility belt right here to make sure it's tight enough, because if it's not really nice and tight, that alternator is going to spin inside once it comes under load. So we want to make sure that was tight and it's doing its job. So the next thing we want to check is the power right here at the discharge port for the alternator. This is the port where the electricity comes and goes into that battery. So you'll notice you can identify that quite easily because it's got a nice little rubber cap on it, and also it's a good thick wire. Good thick wire. Now you'll notice there's something else back here. And this little guy back here is the other guy you're going to want to check in a minute. So what you want to do is take your voltmeter and just check between here and ground. That should equal the electricity that's in your battery. All right, with the alternator running, this should exceed your battery voltage. So if your battery is if you measured your battery and it's 12.5 volts, this should be over 12.5, otherwise it's not charging. So it should be generally around between 13 and 14.5 coming off that little terminal there with it running. So when we tested that with our voltmeter, and I'm going to bring down that voltmeter and show you. That's just a cheap Canadian Tire voltmeter. It's 20 bucks or whatever. You know, have one. If a test light is great, voltmeter is way better. So we tested that. We found that it was only putting out the same as what was in the battery. All right, so now the next thing we want to check is this little guy right back here. And what it does, it sends voltage to to a field inside the alternator. Now the old generators, they didn't have that. They just had an output. But an alternator is a little bit different because it generates alternating current. So you want to check that. With the key on, engine off, that little guy should have 12 volts. And what that does, it charges the field inside the alternator, and that's what, when the armature is spinning, that creates your electrical charge. Then it goes through a rectifier, which changes it from alternating current to direct current, and out she goes and into your battery. So key on, engine off, that should have 12 volts. That little wire right back there. Now that's going to be the same. This alternator, that's not a strange alternator. You'll see that on cars, you'll see it on all sorts of things. GM alternators, Ford alternators, they're all the same. They may have an extra wire too, which is a tack wire. They may have other wires coming out, but look for that little red wire that lights up with your test light or your voltmeter when your key turns on. All right, so when you turn the key on, once you start it, if we're not getting more than 12.5 volts out of that alternator, and you're getting electricity there, then you're pretty well sure that that's your problem. It's a pretty simple diagnosis, but a lot of people, you know, as soon as you mention electricity, they freak out. So that's what it is. Start with your battery. Make sure your connections are good. Load test your battery. Get continuity between that wire and your terminal. Check for your voltage there. If you get the same voltage as on your battery, then you know you've got continuity. Check this wire to make sure that it's actuating your alternator. And then check your alternator output. If all those things are correct, but you're not putting out more than battery voltage, you need to replace your alternator. If you're putting out more voltage than your battery voltage, say for example, if you're putting out 13.5 volts, but your battery still isn't charging, and you may have a short in your battery, and the load test might not show that up. You might have a dead cell, or you may have what they call a leach in the system. Now what a leach does is, it just drains your battery. It's very similar to when you leave your car door open, or you leave your dome light on, or your headlights on. It just drains your battery. These can be caused by not so much on bobcats, but on vehicles such as cars and trucks, when people have installed alarm systems and systems that are active when the car is off. Those things will leach the battery out, and if the battery is not good, then you're going to have a problem with it. So that's basically that overview right there. Taking this alternator off is just, it's child's play. One bolt here, another bolt here. Tension it with a bar behind the alternator. Make sure you don't hit the plastic. Make it nice and tight. There should be just that much play. I'll show you the play you should have in that belt. Just very, very little play. And that's how you do an alternator diagnostic. Pretty straightforward. There's a positive lead there. Negative lead, I just got that touching the motor. And we're looking at 14.